Are you ready to have your perceptions of the Wild West shattered? Hidden behind the popular images of cowboy heroes and lawless outlaws lies a darker and more complex history. The old Wild West has a history of violence, tragedy, and forgotten stories. In this video, we'll explore 17 haunting historical facts that reveal the untold story of the Old West. You'll discover some legendary people who lived and died in the Wild West, their struggles, and their triumphs. Join us on this journey into the unknown and learn about the events that shaped the Old West era and the truth behind the legends and myths of the Wild West. But before we continue, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more updates. Number 17. Dangerous drinks. In the Wild West, whiskey was the drink of choice for many frontier folks. They had some wild names for their drinks like 40 Rods, Tarantula Juice, and Lightning. Sounds exotic, right? But these drinks were insanely strong and packed with some pretty crazy ingredients, including actual poisons like strychnine and other wild ingredients like turpentine and tobacco oil. Often, people needed a second shot just to wash down the first one. If they could handle it without getting sick, a few rounds in, and they'd be so knocked out, they'd forget the harsh taste and end up in a booze-fueled nap, only to wake up and do it all over again. It's not surprising that saloons were scarce and towns were miles apart, making it hard to get supplies. And since there were no rules or regulations for food and drink out west in the 19th century, saloon owners just mixed up whatever they had or whatever they thought would sell. Creative, sure. Safe, definitely not. These Wild West whiskeys were a far cry from the smooth, sippable drinks we enjoy today. They were rough, harsh, and often dangerous. Number 16. Gunfights. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral is a legendary story of the Wild West, but it's not exactly what you think it is. First, it wasn't even held at the OK Corral. The actual shootout took place near the corner of 3rd Street and Fremont Street in Tombstone, Arizona, which is behind the corral. And despite involving 8 men, including the Earp brothers, Morgan, Virgil, and Wyatt, their friend Doc Holliday, and the Clanton and McLaurin brothers, the whole thing was over in just 30 seconds. Surprisingly, such a short fight could be so famous, but it was intense. 3 of the lawmen were hurt, and 3 of the cowboys didn't make it out alive. The Earps and Doc Holliday were on one side, and the Clantons and McLaurins were on the other. The fight was quick, but it was deadly. The Earps were determined to protect the town of Tombstone from the outlaw cowboys, and the cowboys were just as determined to cause trouble. Number 15. Giant cannibals. A long time ago, in what is now Nevada, there were scary stories about giant cannibals with red hair. These stories were passed down by the Native American tribes who lived there, like the Northern Paiute tribe. According to their ancient tales, these giant troublemakers were called the Kaw. They were not only big and strong, but also had fiery red hair and a taste for human flesh. The Paiute people believed that the Sia got their red hair from eating a special water plant. And get this, they would go hunting for people in the high deserts of the Old West, long before anyone from the East Coast arrived. They were feared by everyone, and their reputation was legendary. But the Paiute people were not afraid, and they decided to put an end to the K's reign of terror. According to Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, a Paiute activist, the Paiute warriors were brave and clever. They trapped all the Sia in a big, dark cave, using their knowledge of the land and their cunning. Then, they set the entrance on fire, trapping the Ka inside. And that was the end of the cannibals. Poof. Gone. Number 14. Hidden gold. You might remember the story of the camel red ghost, but it turns out it might be more made up than true. However, the Wild West has plenty of other crazy tales that are just as fascinating. But the ones that stick are about lost mines and hidden fortunes. Back when the West was being settled, there were gold and silver rushes that drew people from the East. Thousands of men, young and old, feeling lucky, crazy, or just bored, headed west for a chance at a new life. Most of them didn't strike gold and went broke quickly. But the lucky few who hit the jackpot inspired others to dream of their big break. That's when the stories started flying. Tales of lost mines, secret treasures, and hidden loot. People said that miners stashed away their riches to keep them safe from sneaky thieves. And according to the stories, that gold is still out there, waiting for someone to stumble upon it. It's no wonder that people are still searching for it today. Number 13. Real cowboys' hats. When we think of the Old West, we often picture cowboys wearing big 10-gallon hats. But surprisingly, that's not what real cowboys wore back then. Those iconic hats didn't become popular until the 1920s, thanks to Hollywood movies. In the 19th century, pioneers and cowboys wore smaller, flat-brimmed hats called Boss of the Plains. These hats were designed by John Stetson, a menswear designer, who saw the need for a better hat. Early settlers had been wearing hats made of straw, silk, fur, and wool, which were uncomfortable and impractical. They were too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter, and absorbed rainwater, making them heavy and soggy. Stetson's Boss of the Plains hat was a game changer. Made from waterproof nutria fur, it had a deep crown and a smaller, flat brim that curled up at the ends to shed rainwater. It was also versatile. Cowboys could flip it over and use it as a makeshift water bucket for their horses. The hat was a bit pricey, costing around $5, equivalent to $75 today. But it was durable and lasted a long time, making it a worthwhile investment for cowboys who spent long days under the harsh sun and rain. The Boss of the Plains hat was a practical choice for cowboys, who needed a hat that could keep up with their rugged lifestyle. It protected their faces and necks from the sun and kept their heads dry in rainy weather. And as a bonus, it could be used as a makeshift water bucket in a pinch. Number 12. Crash at Crush. In the late 19th century, William Crush, a railroad executive known for his dramatic flair, wanted to generate excitement for rail travel in America. In 1894, he needed funding for the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas Railroad Company, also known as the Katy. To get attention and support, Crush organized an extravagant carnival in a temporary Texas town named after himself. The main event was a spectacle where two 35-ton train engines would collide to showcase the railway's power. Despite the tragic outcome, 2 people died and hundreds were injured. The event was considered a financial success. Crush had temporarily turned the location into the second largest city in Texas, attracting over 40,000 spectators. The collision, featuring steam-powered trains hurtling towards each other at speeds over 50 mph, resulted in a spectacular explosion of steam, fire, and train debris. While the tragic incident impressed thousands with the might of the railroad, Crush's supervisors were appalled by his actions. After the railroad overseers learned of the deadly collision, Crush was dismissed from his position. His dramatic stunt had gone too far, and he paid the price for his reckless ambition. The event became known as the Crash at Crush. Number 11. Civil Wars. One important Civil War battle took place in an unexpected location, New Mexico. In early 1862, Confederate General Henry Hopkins Sibley had a plan to seize gold from Colorado to fund the rebel war effort. He thought it would be easy to march into New Mexico from the south, up the Rio Grande, and even take over Colorado. However, the 1st Regiment of Volunteers in Colorado caught wind of his plan and quickly marched 400 miles south in just 13 days to join forces with Union soldiers at Fort Union near Santa Fe. Sibley likely expected an easy victory, but he was wrong. The battle, often called the Gettysburg of the West, turned into a 2-day fight. Union troops, possibly with the help of local ranchers who knew the terrain, managed to sneak around the Confederates and destroy their supply train. With no supplies, the Confederate troops had no choice but to retreat to Texas, defeated, and never to return. This pivotal battle prevented the Confederacy from expanding into the West and secured a crucial Union victory. Number 10. Chewing tobacco was normal. Chewing tobacco was a pretty unpleasant habit back in the old days, but it had a practical purpose. When people worked in hot, dry, and dusty fields, chewing tobacco helped keep their mouths moist. The saliva it generated was a welcome relief from the dust and heat. In the 19th century, when chewing tobacco was really popular, you'd find special bowls called spittoons in most saloons. But they weren't just in bars. You'd see them in stores, pubs, and even banks. These spittoons were where everyone spat out their used tobacco. Imagine a bowl full of chewed-up tobacco, not exactly a pretty sight. But back then, it was just part of the scene, as common as seeing a beer glass on the bar. People would chew on tobacco and then spit it out into these bowls, which were usually made of metal or ceramic. It was a social norm, and everyone did it. The spittoons were often decorated with fancy designs and were a common feature in public places. Number 9. Lack of toilet paper. Believe it or not, toilet paper wasn't a common thing until the mid-1800s. Before we had comfortable toilets inside our homes, people used outdoor sheds, covering a hole in the ground. If you've ever been to a carnival, a live show, or gone camping, you can imagine how unpleasant it must have been. The smell and bugs were a total nightmare. And it gets even worse. Those shared outdoor toilets were not only unsanitary, but they were also infested with bugs. It was like a breeding ground for germs and insects. But wait, it gets even more uncomfortable. Before toilet paper became widely available in the West, people used leaves, corn cobs, and grass to clean themselves. Can you imagine adding to the mess and discomfort? It's no wonder people were eager for a better solution. The introduction of toilet paper in the mid-1800s was a game changer. Number 8. Murdered outlaw displayed in carnival. Elmer McCourty's story is a wild one. He was only 31 when he tried to rob a train in Oklahoma in 1911, but things didn't go as planned. He and his friends thought the train was full of cash, but they only got away with $46. To make matters worse, Elmer got shot and killed by the police. But that's not the end of the story. The sheriff sold Elmer's body to a carnival owner, who mummified him and turned him into a sideshow attraction. People would pay to see the outlaw who would never be captured alive. Later, they changed the display to make it look like Elmer was a drug addict. It's crazy to think about a carnival featuring a dead body as a main attraction. Elmer's body kept moving around over the years, from a warehouse to a wax museum, and eventually to a funhouse exhibit at an amusement park in California. In 1976, a film crew working on the TV show The $6 Million Man stumbled upon Elmer's body, and his arm even fell off. Finally, in 1977, someone decided it was time to give Elmer a proper burial. They brought him back to Guthrie, Oklahoma, and laid him to rest 66 years after his death. What a journey. Number 7. Photo shoot of dead outlaws. In the old days, when outlaws died, people wanted to see proof of their demise. Newspapers would sensationalize their stories, exaggerating their adventures and misdeeds. When outlaws met their end, townspeople would demand evidence, and authorities would oblige, putting on a show to deter potential outlaws. Then, photography came along in the early 1800s, and things changed. Instead of just telling stories, people could take pictures of the outlaws, sometimes posing them together, other times solo. It was like a morbid photo shoot, capturing the not-so-glamorous side of the Wild West. These photos were often taken right before the outlaws were buried, and they served as a warning to others who might consider a life of crime. The authorities wanted to show that crime didn't pay, and that outlaws would ultimately meet a grisly end. The photos were a way to rub it in, to show the public that the outlaws had been brought to justice. And, for the public, it was a way to get a glimpse into the dangerous and often violent world of outlaws. Number 6. Town full of widows. The town of Delamar, Nevada had a nickname that says it all: the Widow Maker. Life in the Wild West was dangerous, and people could die in many ways. Outlaws, diseases, conflicts with Native Americans, and wars were all common threats. On top of that, working conditions were harsh, especially in the mines around Monkey Wrench Gulch in Nevada. The town of Delamar was home to one of these mines, and it was a particularly deadly place. A mill was set up near the mine, which released large amounts of silicon dust into the air. This dust was poisonous, and it exposed the townspeople to serious health risks. As a result, many miners died young, leaving behind their wives and families. At one point, the town, which had a population of only around 500 people, was home to over 400 widows. This is how Delamar earned its nickname, the Widow Maker. Number 5. Planned extinction of buffaloes. In the early 1800s, America was home to millions of bison. Estimates suggest there were between 10 and 30 million of these magnificent creatures roaming the plains. However, by the early 1900s, their numbers had drastically declined to less than 1,000. What happened? The U.S. Army and hired hunters went on a mass killing spree, aiming to wipe out the bison population. By 1830, they were on a mission to eradicate these animals, which were a vital source of food and hides for Native Americans. One colonel even declared, "Kill every buffalo you can. Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone." Even the famous Buffalo Bill Cody joined in, killing 4,000 bison in just 2 years. The bison population hit rock bottom in 1889, with only 256 remaining in captivity. However, thanks to conservation efforts, we've managed to bounce back somewhat. Today, there are between 15,000 to 200,000 bison in the United States. While their numbers are still a far cry from their initial millions, it's a step in the right direction. Number 4. Extreme violence. You've probably seen movies and TV shows that make the Wild West look like a place where shootouts and showdowns happen every day. While it wasn't exactly like that, it wasn't a peaceful place either. Take Dodge City, Kansas, for example. It was known as one of the roughest places back then, and for good reason. The murder rate in Dodge City was extremely high. About 165 adults were killed per 100,000 people each year. To put it another way, if you lived in Dodge City between 1876 and 1885, you had a 1 in 61 chance of getting murdered. That's pretty intense. To put this in perspective, in 2020, the most violent city in the world was Los Cabos, Mexico, with a murder rate of 138 per 100,000 people. It's amazing to think that Dodge City was even more dangerous than that back in the day. This shows that the Wild West was a truly dangerous place, even if it wasn't all shootouts and showdowns like in the movies. Number 3. Lack of delicious food. Eating like they did in the Old West might sound exciting, but it wasn't exactly a culinary delight. The food was pretty basic and not very appetizing. For breakfast, you might get some cornbread, stew, boiled eggs, fried potatoes, and omelets. Not too bad, right? But dinner was a different story altogether. Imagine eating boiled mutton, cave-aged cheese, or even sautéed calf's feet. And for dessert, you'd get pudding. This was a typical dinner for a frontier family around 1853. The way they cooked was very simple, using ovens, frying pans, and roasting spits. The menu depended on what meat and vegetables were available at the time of year. Cowboys had it even simpler, with canned beans, rock-hard biscuits, dried meat, dried fruit, and coffee. They didn't have much variety, and their diet was often limited to what they could carry with them on the trail. But if you're interested in trying some old-timey food while soaking up the history, there's a great spot to visit, the Buckhorn Saloon and Museum in San Antonio, Texas. It's like a little taste of the Wild West, but with food you want to eat. Number 2. Very notorious outlaws. John Wesley Hardin, a notorious outlaw from Texas, started causing trouble at a very young age. By 14, he had already tried to kill someone with a knife, and by 15, he had shot and killed his uncle's slave and 3 soldiers who came after him. In his autobiography, Hardin claimed to have killed 44 men, but many of these stories are hard to prove and are likely exaggerated. However, it's believed that he may have killed between 15 to 30 people during his lifetime. Hardin's life was marked by a series of violent encounters, one after the other. While in Abilene, Kansas, he met Wild Bill Hickok, the local marshal, and surprisingly, they got along. Maybe Hickok didn't know or didn't care that Hardin was wanted for murder back in Texas. But things took a deadly turn on August 6, 1871, when Hardin, drunk and annoyed by a snoring man in the next hotel room, shot through the wall, killing him. People started saying that Hardin was so mean he'd shoot a man just for snoring. After that, Hardin fled town, dodging Hickok and the law until 1875, when he was finally caught and tried for killing a well-liked sheriff in Comanche, Texas. He was only 21 years old and received a 25-year sentence. However, he served only 17 years before being pardoned in 1894. His luck ran out a year later when a man he had argued with earlier that day shot him in the back of the head while he was playing dice, and then shot him a few more times just to make sure. Number 1. Family of serial killers. When you think of the Wild West, you might picture cowboys and bandits, but there were also some notorious serial killers, like the Bender family. This creepy family of German immigrants settled in Leavenworth County, Kansas, for just a year between 1871 and 1872. They ran a strange business, a combination of a general store and a small inn for travelers, complete with a barn, corral, and even a well on the property. The Benders, also known as the Bloody Benders, weren't exactly the friendliest folks in town. People thought they were weird, mean, or just a little off. 4 of them lived there: John Bender Sr. and his wife Elvira, their son John Jr., and his girlfriend Kate, who might have been his sister. It turns out this family was up to some dark stuff. They're believed to have killed at least 11 people, burying their victims in their orchard. The family would invite travelers to stay at their inn and then kill them for their money and belongings. They targeted people who were traveling alone, and no one suspected a thing until a doctor went missing and a search party found his horse still tied up outside the Bender's inn. As whispers started spreading about all these missing people and suspicion began to point their way, the Bender family suddenly disappeared, leaving behind a whole lot of questions. It's still a mystery why they did what they did and how they managed to get away with it for so long. That's it for our journey into the haunting stories of the Wild West. We've explored the darker side of this era and uncovered some surprising truths. We hope you learned something new, had fun along the way, and will keep exploring the fascinating stories of the past. Thank you for watching. Please drop your thoughts in the comments and share this video. Don't forget to subscribe.